Good evening. Welcome to our Unite Tulsa event. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'll be your MC this evening. Our event this evening commemorates the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial by sparking a conversation about race relations in Oklahoma, with particular emphasis on the themes of empathy, education, and healing. In tonight's forum, Tulsa County residents will tell us about the ways they are working to make our community a better, more inclusive place to live. Each speaker will have 5 minutes using 20 slides set to auto advance every 20 seconds. We would like to thank Tulsa City County Library CEO Kim Johnson, the Tulsa Library Trust, the Tulsa Library Commission, and the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission for their support of this event. During the event, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. We've set aside time at the end of the presentations for a question and answer session. Without further ado, let's welcome Greg Taylor. Greg is a builder with Taylor Homes. He is also president of the 1256 movement, a nonprofit that is making reparations for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre by building new and rehab homes to increase home ownership in North Tulsa. You can learn more about reparations and home ownership equity by contacting Greg Taylor through the website 1256movement.org. Here's Greg.
Reporter Randy Crable and historian Carlos K. Hill said that the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre is the deadliest outbreak of white terrorist violence against a Black community in United States history. A very important Black leader named John Hope Franklin once said this about the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. The massacre not only took lives and property, but also robbed the city of its honesty and sentenced it to 100 years of denial. 100 years ago in Tulsa, mob violence often took the lives of Black people by lynching. Meanwhile, Black men coming back from World War I, rightly proud of their service, were incensed at the so-called mob justice that took innocent lives of Black people, and they began more vigorously defending themselves and their community against white violence. On May 30th, 1921, in a building in downtown Tulsa, a 19-year-old Black man named Dick Rowland tripped over the feet of a 17-year-old elevator operator named Sarah Page. Page screamed, Rowland ran. Rowland was quickly falsely accused by newspapers, police, white mobs for assaulting a white woman. White mobs gathered at the courthouse to lynch Rowland. Black men also gathered at the courthouse to defend Rowland from being lynched. A white man tried to disarm a Black man in the crowd. A gun went off, and a gun battle began between white and Black men on the streets of Tulsa that night of May 31st, 1921. Hundreds of white men were then deputized in front of the Tulsa police station. Hundreds of white men deputized by the Tulsa police, and one white man named Laurel Buck said that the police told him, using the N-word, to get a gun and get a Black person. Black men and women defended their homes, businesses, churches from white attack on Greenwood. These white city and county deputized men and white mobs, thousands, removed Black people from their homes, murdered many Black people on their front yards, looted their homes, and burned 1,256 homes to the ground. They also burned more than 100 businesses, 8 churches, a hospital, and a school. The Red Cross estimated that 300, most of them Black people, were killed in white racial violence between May 31st, 1921 and June 1st, 1921. Kenny Booker lived with his parents and 4 brothers and sisters at 320 North Hartford Avenue, a home that looks a lot like this. Mr. Booker said, "We had a lovely home filled with beautiful furniture and a grand piano." Mr. Booker said, "Early on the morning of June 1st, 1921, my parents were awakened by the sounds of shooting and the smell of fire. My dad awakened us children and sent us to the attic with our mother. We could hear what was going on below. We heard the white men ordering my dad to come with them. He was being taken to detention. We could hear Dad pleading with the mobsters. He was begging them, please don't set our house on fire. But of course, that's exactly what they were about to do. Though Dad went outside the house with the mobsters, he slipped away from them when they got preoccupied splashing gas or kerosene on the outside of the house. He rushed to the attic and rescued us. We slipped into the crowd of fleeing Black refugees. Thank God we did not burn up in the attic, but all of our clothes and all of our personal belongings, everything, were burned up." Genevieve Elizabeth Tillman Jackson experienced the trauma as a young girl of thinking at first she was seeing birds dropping from the sky and realized later that what was dropping from the air was firebombs from World War II era planes to terrorize Greenwood and drive out the Black community. Mrs. Tillman Jackson is another survivor who told her true story of the massacre as an eyewitness. These victims, survivors, and their descendants deserve a hearing from white Tulsans, much, much more than they have received. Victims, survivors, and descendants who were robbed of their lives, homes, churches, schools, hospitals by deputized city officials and resisted prevention methods from them to rebuild also deserve what the Jewish Bible calls restitution and that we today call reparations. I believe there's no true reconciliation in a community trauma like what happened in Greenwood in 1921 without reparations. The city and private citizens simply have never repaired this tragedy. Black lawyers challenged hastily made city fire codes to try to prevent Black people from rebuilding. White Tulsans were jealous of Black success and wanted more land. Courts prevented insurance claims from being paid. Lumber yards refused to sell lumber to Black people to rebuild their homes. So the Red Cross gave Black landowners 1 million board feet of lumber after the massacre. Against so much terror, Black Tulsans still rebuilt homes, businesses, and churches. They would not be run out of Tulsa. Black Tulsans would not be defeated by white supremacy. The story changed me, led me as a white person to ask, what if the city of Tulsa and citizens of Tulsa, particularly white Tulsans like me, have reparation payments for the land, home rehabs, and new homes to increase home ownership among Black families of Tulsa? Oh, Greenwood was rebuilt in the 1920s and rose and was revived again, but not because of white people. White people didn't help. I'm a builder and a person of deep conviction that God has created us to care for creation and one another better than this. What could I do as a builder and a person who wants to increase home ownership for Black families in Tulsa? In 2019, I started the 1256 movement. That's the number of homes burned to the ground by white mobs. What if we build a collective of builders, realtors, developers, white and people of color who own these homes with the goal to build 1,256 homes in the next 10 years? That's my vision, and I believe that's my last slide. And so I'm going to close on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Next up, we have Katie Dilks. She is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation, where she works to collaboratively identify and strengthen statewide solutions ensuring access to civil justice for all Oklahomans. Katie has 15 years of experience working to improve our legal institutions in Washington, D.C. and Oklahoma.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm here tonight to tell you that Shakespeare was wrong. In Henry VI, Part 2, Shakespeare said, "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." But what if the answer to at least one of our problems was actually more lawyers, or at least more access to them? So most folks know that in criminal cases in the United States, our system guarantees defendants a lawyer because we recognize that if we're potentially taking away someone's liberty or even their life, we had better be very sure that the system and the playing field are fair. But what about in other areas of the law, which can also have a dramatic impact on someone's life, like potentially losing your kids, your job, or your home? In these cases, in most places, you only have legal help if you can afford it or if you can find a legal aid or pro bono lawyer to help you in that case. So tonight, let's drill down into one area where a lot of folks are trying to change this: housing, specifically evictions. Many people across the country and right here in Tulsa are working toward what's called a right to counsel in eviction cases, meaning everyone could have a lawyer. So imagine, if you will, playing a game where one side has a coach who knows all the rules and has played this game hundreds of times before, and you're playing it without a coach for the very first time. Now imagine that if you lose this game, you might become homeless. Does that feel like a fair system? But that's the case every single day in eviction court in Tulsa. In 2019, here in Tulsa, over 80% of landlords in eviction court had lawyers on their side, while fewer than 10% of renters did. And those numbers are pretty consistent all across the country and have really important consequences for racial justice. Making sure that both sides have lawyers doesn't change the laws underlying it or what people's rights and responsibilities are on either side of a rental contract. It just means that the process of going through court is more fair and that people have the help they need to fully understand the legal system. Eviction already hits communities of color harder in Tulsa simply because of a disparity in rental rates. So here, partly due to the historic destruction of Black-owned property, 75% of owner-occupied households are white, while only 55% of renter-occupied households are. And when we look beyond just differences in rates of renting, studies have found that rates of eviction filings are substantially higher against Black renters than against white. One national study found that 1 in 5 renters were Black, but 1 in 3 eviction filings were served to Black renters. And then on top of this, women face eviction at even higher rates than men. Across all renters, the risk of eviction is about 2% higher for women than men. But for Black women, this difference increases to 4%, and for Latina women, it jumps to 9%. Because our courts don't actually collect demographic data, we don't know the exact numbers for Tulsa, but legal aid lawyers and others who work in this system are confident that our demographic trends are similar to these national ones, with Black and brown women facing some of the highest rates of eviction. Fortunately, there's a better way. When tenants have guaranteed access to lawyers, or a right to counsel, it means that landlords are much more likely to not use eviction as a means of harassment, to collect rent, or over trivial matters that could easily be handled outside of court. And sometimes having a lawyer won't change the overall outcome, like a tenant having to leave their home, but it can change the circumstances, like being able to negotiate extra time to move out so a family can find a new place to live instead of becoming homeless. Lawyers can also make sure that any financial charges, like for late fees, back rent, or legal fees, are appropriate. A University of Tulsa Law School study last year found that tenants with lawyers on their side had money judgments half the size of those who are unrepresented in court. And all of this is so important because eviction has profound and long-lasting consequences on families and communities. It often leads to worse physical and mental health outcomes, lower educational attainment for kids, job loss, and living in substandard housing. And that's partly because the Scarlet E, or having an eviction judgment, or even just a filing on your record, means many landlords will refuse to rent to you in the future. This leaves folks at the mercy of often unscrupulous landlords who tend to charge higher rents for worse units simply because people have no other choice. And because evictions hit Black and Brown communities harder, it means that many BIPOC families are spending relatively more on rent, security deposits, application fees, late fees, and legal fees, which creates an uphill battle to building both individual and community wealth. Like I said earlier, having lawyers on both sides ensures that the playing field is level, but it doesn't necessarily mean the rules are fair. So for example, in Oklahoma, there's no law that prevents a landlord from evicting a renter or raising their rent in retaliation for complaining to the health department about unsafe living conditions. And that's only true in 5 states. So this means that while we work toward a right to counsel to make sure we have a level playing field, we also need to update our state laws to make sure that the rules of the game are fair for both landlords and renters. Fortunately, many people across Tulsa and the whole state are working to improve this system. So if you're interested in learning more, please ask me about ways to get involved. I believe that working together, we can achieve a community where all Tulsans can find safe, affordable, and stable housing. And sometimes that takes a lawyer.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Daniel Isgreg is up. He's an assistant professor and director of the Holy Spirit Research Center and Archives at Oral Roberts University. He's the author of several books, including his upcoming book on the history of Pentecostalism in Tulsa, which tells the stories of the Black Pentecostal churches he's going to talk about in today's presentation.
Thank you very much. So it's been said that Tulsa has excelled in 2 primary industries, oil and Jesus, and the story of Pentecostalism in Tulsa has proven this to be true. Oil has provided wealth and opportunities for Tulsa citizens, but it's the churches that have become the fabric of the community. Tulsa's Greenwood district is also rightly known as Black Wall Street, but it should be equally known for its religious heritage, particularly the iconic churches such as Mount Zion Baptist and Vernon Ame display its religious and economic prosperity. Scott Ellsworth notes that there were more churches in Black Tulsa than in the city's white community. However, we know that the 1921 race massacre took its toll on Black churches. The Red Cross notes that there were 8 Black churches that were destroyed or damaged. But absent from the list are any Pentecostal churches. So I wondered, were there any churches that survived this? And that's what I want to share about tonight. Pentecostalism is a Christian denomination that began with the Azusa Street Mission in Los Angeles, led by a Black man named William Seymour, who had an interracial vision that was radical in the days of Jim Crow. One attendee was C.H. Mason, the founder of the first Black Pentecostal denomination, the Church of God in Christ. Now, in many of the histories about Tulsa's Pentecostal churches and their origins, none of them discuss the Black Pentecostal churches, and none of them discuss the Tulsa Race Massacre. Considering the Black origins of Pentecostalism in general, I find this a great tragedy. Pentecost first came to Tulsa's Greenwood community in 1917, when Bishop Mason asked Bishop Travis B. Sipuel to move to Tulsa to establish the first Church of God in Christ church. Travis and his wife, Martha Bell Smith, were both children of former slaves. They moved to Tulsa from Arkansas because they believed that Greenwood would be a place that would be a promised land for them. So when they moved here, they found a lovely little house in North Greenwood, and they leased a church at 700 North Greenwood, which is today just up on the hill, just above the north parking lot for OSU Tulsa. They were excited for the journey, and they were very successful. By the time of 1921, they had grown the church to over 120 people. Pretty amazing. Well, when the violence broke out on June 1st, they stood helplessly as the white mob looted their possessions and set fire to their beautiful home. Travis was forced, with many other Black men, to march with their hands held high to an internment camp. And because of her white complexion, one of the men mistook Martha for a white woman and told her, "You better get yourself back to the white part of town." Having lost everything, they moved to Chickasha, but unfortunately, it was not a place of escape from racial violence. 9 years to the day, a white mob lynched Henry Argo in Chickasha. As a result, Ada Lois's mother started working with the local NAACP chapter. The Sipuel's daughter, Ada Lois, was brilliant, and after college, the NAACP approached Martha about the possibility of her trying to get into the OU Law School, which had an all-white policy. Ada Lois volunteered. She was deemed academically qualified, but she was denied simply because she was Black. So NAACP lawyers Thurgood Marshall and Amos Hall took Ada Lois's case all the way to the Supreme Court. This case eventually paved the way for Brown versus Board of Education. I find it simply amazing that segregation in America ended in large part due to a Pentecostal family who fled in 1921. Even in this tragedy, I believe God was working. So what happened to the church? Survivor Eldoris McConaughey recalls that looters tried to burn the church. She said, "I don't know how many times, but each time they set it afire, it wouldn't burn. The blaze would go up and then it would come down, and eventually they gave up and moved on." She commented, "God saved the church." So after surviving the first attempted arson, the church continued at its location until it moved to its present location at 1400 block of North Greenwood. The church has become a flagship church for the Church of God in Christ, and many other churches were launched from it. This present building was built in the 1950s. Another Pentecostal survivor is the legendary Otis Clark, who was 18 when the shooting began. The next day, as he returned after fleeing the town, his grandparents' house was burned to the ground, and even worse, his mother's new husband, Tom Bryant, was never found and presumed dead. Clark eventually left for Los Angeles, where he became a famous butler for Joan Crawford in Hollywood, but he also became a Kojic evangelist. So Greenwood not only survived, but it thrived after 1921. In the midst of the devastation, they had significant growth. In 1921, the Kojic Church had 140 members. In 1922, 250. So many that a new church was launched at 1202 North Lansing called Greater Lansing Kojic Church. Some survivors fled to the nearby Buford colony in Sand Springs, which was populated by Black Pentecostals from Greenwood, who found a home there on the cotton farm. They first built a building that was an open-air tabernacle and eventually built that church. The great tragedy is that no Pentecostal histories even mention the massacre. White Pentecostals in Tulsa enjoyed the privilege of self-sufficiency and were content not to cross the tracks or to fellowship with Pentecostal believers who were Black. They didn't even know them, and so they didn't empathize with their plight. This is illustrated perfectly in the Tulsa World Story about Emancipation Day, a festival in which 5,000 African Americans came to the same park where white Pentecostals were having a camp meeting. After they left, the Blacks came in, and did they stay and celebrate with them? Probably not. Instead of sharing in the celebration of freedom, they left the Blacks to celebrate alone. Pentecostalism was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be God's answer for Jim Crow. Bishop Morris Golder says, If white Pentecostal brethren would have stood firm against prejudice and racial injustice, they could have been the instruments of God for the destruction of the heinous ideology. And instead of fighting it, they submitted to its influence and have been affected by it today. 100 years later, we're still pretty much geographically separate. But perhaps the stories of these survivors can help us build a greater racial empathy and recapture the vision of Azusa. They believe that the color line was truly washed away in the blood of Jesus. It is Jesus that brings people together. Maybe we can unite Tulsa that way.
Thank you, Dr. Iskrig. Now we have Danny Kyle. She's a stage director for opera and theater with extensive experience as an arts educator. She most recently directed the Billy Goat's Gruff for Tulsa Opera, a virtual presentation of opera on tour that is available this year for free to all teachers in Oklahoma. Danny brings her experience as an education director in regional theater and a community organizer for political campaigns to her new position as director of outreach for Tulsa Opera.
Tulsa Opera values building partnerships that truly put opera within reach of all. Through participation in community parades, concerts in local parks, or pivoting to create a virtual talk show during a pandemic, outreach increases the impact of our musical performances. My first opera, the early morning in line and 12 euros were more than worth it to see La Traviata in Milan, Italy. I was captivated by the spectacle, the self-sacrificing heroine, but most of all by the music. The violin, the cello vibrated through my body as I walked back to the hostel after the show. Opera opened up something new in me that evening, the ultimate art form, music, drama, dance, and spectacle, character and emotion, in extravagant performances conveying human feeling, vibrant, all-encompassing, resulting in stories that speak to the depth of what it is to be human. In experiencing that together at live performance, we collectively empathize, we grow, and are offered the potential to heal. This spring, we are co-producing an opera concert with the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission that will honor the resilience of Black Tulsans and Black America. In researching for the event, co-curators Artistic Director Tobias Picker and Howard Watkins, the assistant conductor at the Met, discovered that the contributions of Black composers have been omitted from the opera and classical music realms, much like the history of the massacre that was obscured for years. Our company is taking a humble step toward rectifying this by commissioning new work by 4 Black composers, like Haitian composer David Bontemps, whose work has been hailed as a poignant way to express the woes, the strength, and the hopes of a people, with drama that plays in the depths of the piano. Pianist Stuart Goodyear, the first African-American to record the complete Beethoven piano concertos, will have 2 world premieres in the concert, One Perfect Rose and Condolence. Beethoven, he says, changed everything for him, describing the music as joyous and cathartic, as well as defiant. Nkiro Okoye is best known for her opera, Harriet Tubman. Studying her life, Dr. Okoye was able to write the story and the music true to Tubman's experience. Gospel, jazz, blues, ragtime, the African-American folk idioms play throughout. 2020 Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Anthony Davis is developing an opera, Fire Across the Tracks, Tulsa 1921, based around 4 characters who were residents of the Greenwood district at the time of the massacre. Although his entire opera won't be seen yet, his aria, There Are Many Trails of Tears, will be sung by Devon Tynes. The aria is based on first-hand account written by the young Black lawyer of a Choctaw descent. Mr. Tynes has described performing as shared experience with the audience, a chance to perhaps look at each other with a little more empathy. Also singing is Christy Swan, known for her captivating characterization, playing tragic characters that evoke sorrow and delightful characters with a contagious sense of humor. Like Louis Armstrong said, "What we play is life, and opera singers portray characters with all of the emotions of life." Leah Hawkins was a young artist at the Met last season who played the small role of Strawberry Woman in Porgy and Bess. Her 90-second aria was a literal showstopper on opening night. Written for an all-Black cast, Porgy and Bess utilizes the grandness of opera to portray themes of resilience, acceptance, and redemption. Leona Mitchell first sang in her church choir here in Oklahoma, and her talents have taken her all over the world. She discussed being labeled as an activist in the 1980s on Tulsa Opera's virtual talk show. At the height of her career, she used her voice to speak out against casting prejudices against Black male singers. Issachar Savage's performance in Othello was praised for his character arc, opening with notes perfectly shaded and coiled with repressed fury to an explosion of grief and shame in the final moments. His voice expressing a full range of human emotion in one show. Kevin Thompson is known for his commanding bass voice, able to produce powerfully low notes with ease. His talent reminds us that opera singers, like Olympic athletes, train their elite instrument extensively to project complex musicality over the orchestra while playing character and story. Noah Stewart first trained at New York City's LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts. He believes as an artist he can never stop learning and wants to start a school to help musicians of color, to give back, to be a mentor himself, and to speak to young artists and reach out to new audiences. Denise Graves is a superstar of the opera world who leads a nonprofit foundation to break down barriers to success for talented young singers. It's important for working artists to fully represent the rich tapestry that is America, because what stories we tell and who tells them matters. Local Tulsa artists Chris Rogers and Donald Ross created the iconic Black Wall Street mural. This and other images from their body of work will be projected at the concert, hoping to spark conversation about our shared past and our shared future. And that is the hope for art, for stories, bringing people together. And when you add in music, like in opera, it's all the more special. There are physical responses to hearing music. Pupils dilate, hearts beat faster, goosebumps. Dopamine, the chemical that surges when we fall in love, is released. Anxiety lowered, moods elevated. As Miss Graves says, music brings a stability to humanity in an uncivilized time. The magic of the live event awaits. Singers, composers, a history that reverberates today. Together, we will empathize. Collectively, we'll grow, and will be offered a potential to heal. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Now we welcome Roberto Mendoza, is a Muskogee Creek Chicano writer, filmmaker, and a lifelong social justice activist. With him presenting is Holly Wald-Dallenberg. She's a Cherokee farmer, beekeeper, and advocate for social and ecological freedom.
Oa, Osio, Inche, hello. We would like to start by acknowledging and thanking the three tribal nations that Tulsa is built on. The Osage Nation, who originally occupied all of Northeast Oklahoma, the Cherokee and the Muskogee Creek Nation, who came here on the Trail of Tears. Cooperation Tulsa is a local grassroots organization and a member of the National Symbiosis Federation with the goal of creating a more democratic society based on direct democracy, anti-hierarchy, ecology, solidarity economy, and revolution from the ground up. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called for a radical revolution of values. Our nation is one built on racism, greed, and land theft, The first step to healing is to insist on a new set of values, Earth-centered, indigenous/communalist values. Indigenous values are values that we all share because they are land-based. We're not all Native Americans, but we are here now and should treat the land, plants, animals, and people with respect, reciprocity, and responsibility. Values are what makes us indigenous, not our DNA. We must respect all living things, regardless of their economic value. We must respect our Mother Earth through sustainable agricultural practices. We must respect the labor of workers that generate wealth. We must respect women for their care duties. We must practice reciprocity, which means to mutually exchange, to give when we take. We must give back to the land that was stolen from Native people and for the labor stolen from enslaved Black people. We must restore balance and harmony with the earth and all living things. As Americans, we like to talk about our rights, but we really should be talking about our responsibilities. Wearing a mask is one example of how we can be responsible for the health of others in the community. The extreme individualism that this country has prided itself on is irresponsible. To heal Tulsa's people and land, we must answer Dr. King's call, and we will do that with a project called Tulsa Summer, where youth from around the country will come to Tulsa to participate in activities like urban gardening, popular education, and creating public art. Tulsa Summer was inspired by Detroit Summer, which was started in 1992 by James and Grace Lee Boggs to redefine, respirit, and rebuild the city. The goal of Detroit Summer was to develop a program where area youth could learn to become leaders to help shape the city's future. Tulsa youth will do the same. Detroit Summer, in turn, was inspired by the Mississippi Summer Project, which was a 1964 voter registration drive aimed at increasing the number of registered Black voters in Mississippi. Over 700 mostly white volunteers joined African Americans to fight against voter intimidation and discrimination at the polls.
The medicine wheel is made up of 4 colors that represent the 4 elements, the 4 directions in the world and within ourselves. To begin to heal our spiritual, emotional, and mental elements, we can start by healing the physical aspect, the body, the land. We will start at the historic Vernon Ame Church, which sits on Cherokee Nation territory. This building is the only standing Black-owned structure from the historic Black Wall Street era and a physical reminder of the Tulsa Race Massacre. The food from this garden will supplement their current weekly food pantry distribution. We will create at least 2 raised beds by May 31st, the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. We must reconcile and repair the relationship between our Black community members in Greenwood, our Native community members on Cherokee land, and the descendants of white Tulsans. The second community garden project is the Black Wall Street Market Community Pride Garden in North Tulsa on Osage Nation territory. The Black Wall Street Market is an amazing place run by an amazing woman, Miss Billy Parker. Buy Black and put money in our local Black economy. The third garden project is the Tipton Community Garden, sponsored by Kendall Whittier Incorporated in the Kendall Whittier neighborhood on Muskogee Creek Nation territory. The food will be grown collectively and shared collectively with the neighbors of this garden. These 3 hearts represent the 3 community gardens that we will work with, each one on the 3 tribal nations that make up Tulsa, Osage, Cherokee, and Muskogee Nation. Repairing the land with our community and letting our Indigenous values guide us will be healing the heart of Tulsa. To start Tulsa Summer, we are hosting a networking opportunity called Solidarity Tulsa Mayday event on Saturday, May 1st from 10 a.m. to noon at Veterans Park in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We'll be meeting. Later in the day, we'll be hosting workshops with topics such as practicing Indigenous values, labor organizing, and reading discussions. When we end Tulsa Summer, we will be celebrating the fruits of our shared labor. Our rewards will not be dumb luck, but intentional hard work. The best way to find a four-leaf clover is to plant a field of clovers. We will heal the physical, thus healing the mind, emotions, and spirit of Tulsa. We would like to thank and acknowledge other supporting organizations for contributing their time, energy, and knowledge to this shared goal. Specifically, Peaceful Rally Tulsa, Green Country DSA, Green Country IWW, Raising Native Hope, and Tulsa Food Not Bombs. Please join us during this Tulsa Summer. Join both the Cooperation Tulsa Facebook page and forum. We have general meetings that are welcome to all every other Saturday, with the next being April 17th on a Saturday at 4 p.m. We'll be meeting in person and on Zoom. Thank you, everyone. Wado Nagada.
Wado.
Thank you, Roberto and Holly. Next up is Leslie Neal. She is the founder and executive director of Modus, a nonprofit organization that is changing the way we think about mobility and transportation. Leslie is a versatile change agent dedicated to equity as it relates to connecting communities and ensuring that everyone has access to the services and opportunities they need to thrive.
How did you get to where you are right now? I don't mean in regards to your professional success or your personal growth, but literally, how did you get to where you physically are at this very moment? Perhaps you drove home in a car, or ordered a ride on your smartphone, or biked to a cafe. Now imagine you didn't have a car and your only option was a city bus. That might not seem so bad at first, but consider if the only housing you can afford is a half a mile from the nearest bus stop and requires a 2-hour round trip commute to work each day. Think about the amount of planning needed for low-income workers, especially those with children, to manage their day-to-day routines. For millions of people in the US, this is not simply a hypothetical exercise, but something they deal with daily. Take Latoya, for example. Latoya is a young mother who gave birth to premature twins at a hospital 10 miles from her house, and the bus would require she spend over an hour commuting each way to visit the NICU. Latoya is just one of roughly 80,000 people in Tulsa struggling to get to the places she needs to go. A neighborhood that lacks access to safe and reliable transportation is called a transit desert. Similar to food deserts, transit deserts are areas in which transit is lacking due to improper funding, infrastructure, and policies to protect those resources. This becomes even more of an issue to those communities who depend solely on public transit systems for mobility. Transportation, or lack thereof, directly affects every part of our lives as a community. On a national level, transportation barriers lead to decreased physical and mental health, poorer educational outcomes, and lower employment rates. Recognizing that transportation barriers and transit deserts exist in our community is the first step in solving this problem. Transportation equity is safe, reliable, and affordable transit available to everyone, regardless of income, origin, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, or ability. It provides all people access to the resources, services, and opportunities they need to not only survive, but to thrive. In Tulsa, roughly 20% of the population, or 80,000 people, are unable to access healthcare, jobs, school, and other services they need due to the lack of adequate transportation options in our area. This inequitable access perpetuates economic, educational, and health disparities in our community and is one of the major barriers preventing people from escaping poverty. Historically, transportation systems have ignored the voices of people of color, women, and youth when designing transit projects. Look at where Interstate 244 was built, right through the Greenwood district. The lack of advocacy and support to these communities often leaves them trapped in their own neighborhoods, unable to easily commute to their surrounding community. What we've been left with is a transportation system that has ignored those who need it the most, primarily those living in low-income neighborhoods, people with physical challenges, and non-English speakers. The current system has built an invisible barrier in our community, which has continued to divide our city and contribute to racial and social inequality. A recent survey of low-income patients reported that those who ride the bus to the doctor's office were twice as likely to miss appointments as those patients who drove cars. Another study found that 25% of lower income patients have missed or rescheduled appointments due to lack of transportation. The patients who reported issues with transportation also missed filling prescriptions more than twice as often as patients without that same problem. Now, Tulsa is a top-ranking city when it comes to the number of nonprofit organizations per capita. However, what good are these services if people can't get to them? At Modus, we are focused on ensuring that all Tulsans can access the services they need to succeed and the opportunities they need to thrive. Attending job interviews has been described as difficult for job seekers if they don't have access to a car and are reliant on public transport. One national study found that 2/3 of job seekers are without access to cars. And further studies have found that the car provides a real advantage when seeking work and can be the deciding factor when it comes to taking up educational and training opportunities. Better transportation will lead to a stronger and more equitable workforce, and the same is true for education. For students from low-income households attending higher education, many of the commutes they need to make to fully participate in the academic activities were not made because they were not feasible. This lack of reliable transportation also leads to higher absentee rates among students, which impacts graduation rates. The city of Tulsa was designed for single-use vehicles and has continued to pour funding into the upkeeping roads and highways instead of public transit. Yet recent studies have shown that only 23% of juniors and seniors enrolled at TPS have a driver's license or learner's permit, indicating that Tulsans will be more reliant on public transit in the years to come. At Modus, our mission is to remove barriers through innovative transportation solutions, education, and advocacy. Our programs Modus Drive and Modus Ed increase independence through improved mobility and ensure that everyone can get to the services they need. Modus Drive is a primarily volunteer-based transportation service that ensures individuals and their families get to appointments consistently, on time, and safely. Modus partners with social service agencies in Tulsa to provide curb-to-curb transportation for the agency's clients to get to and from medical and social services. And Modus is completely free for the passengers. Modus Ed ensures that young people have the knowledge they need to use Tulsa's existing transit options to get to school, part-time jobs, and higher educational opportunities. Our research has shown that more than half of secondary students have reported that they don't know how to use the city bus. So after the first full year of Modus Ed, youth ridership on Tulsa Transit increased by 29%. Modus is designed to unite communities through physical connection and to provide both practical needs and to empower our community members to become advocates for their own personal needs and the needs of their neighbors. When more individuals thrive in a community, change blossoms. Modus is a community effort comprised of passionate volunteers, supporters, and advocates. If you'd like to join us in our effort to drive change and improve the flawed infrastructures that deliberately and passively create a community of inequality, visit us at our website at www.modustulsa.org to make a donation or to sign up to volunteer today. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Modus is setting the trend for equitable transportation, and our programs represent innovative solutions to an age-old problem. Our overall objective is to ensure that all Tulsans have reliable and equitable access, because transportation isn't a privilege, it's a right.
Thank you, Leslie. Next up is Katie Plohocki. She's the co-founder and president of the Healthy Community Store Initiative, HCSI, a nonprofit dedicated to overcoming barriers to nutritious food access for those living in food deserts by positioning food security as an opportunity for community revitalization. She is building a framework to address the root causes associated with lack of neighborhood grocery stores and rebuilding the ecosystem of the food supply chain through a combination of locally owned mobile and micro storefronts, regional food hubs, regenerative agriculture, and entrepreneurial opportunities along the supply chain. She is a fellow with Ashoka Changemakers, Women Leaders for the World, and Boehringer Ingelheim's Make Better Health initiative.
I envision a world where all people have equitable access to nutritious food. Over the last century, the nation's food system has radically transformed from locally owned to corporate controlled, dependent on toxic agriculture. Despite increased food production, there is a lack of healthy, affordable food in low income and communities of color. These photos are a visual reminder of the pride and diligence which rebuilt Tulsa's African-American community in the aftermath of the 1921 race massacre. More than 30 neighborhoods, grocery stores fed the community along the Greenwood corridor between Archer and Pine. The loss of these stores and their community influence began with the advent of the modern supermarket and the repeal of Jim Crow laws. As their customers left their community to shop what had been unattainable, the flow of dough decreased, with the dollar circulating 16 times within the community to now only 3 times in the community. Today, north of downtown Tulsa struggles to find groceries as nutrition is dictated by neighborhood convenience stores and fast food. There is a direct correlation between health disparities and life expectancy with the lack of a grocery store. Diet-related diseases cost Oklahoma taxpayers $788 million last year. The effects of Greenwood Massacre and subsequent discrimination continue to be felt to this day. Today, over 80,000 Tulsans live in a food desert with little or no access to healthy, affordable food. 19% of these households have no transportation. There is a stark contrast between North and South Tulsa in rates of diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Health outcomes should not be determined by which zip code you live in. For example, North Tulsa has 50% more diabetes than South Tulsa at 25%. Not all food is created equal. How it is grown is important. Organic and regenerative practices rebuild healthy soil, which supplies nutrients to the food. Where it comes from is equally important. Nutrient loss begins the moment it is harvested, so the closer, the better. So what if we could position nutrition equity as an economic opportunity to revitalize North Tulsa? An equitable local food system can be a catalyst for economic growth along the food supply chain, increasing community wealth and community health. Community ownership of land, production, distribution, and retail outlets can address structural racial inequality in the food system. Being at the table isn't enough. You need to be building the menu from the ground up. Community food strategies are key for creating roadmaps and goals and collaboration. However, there are many structural barriers to overcome to ensure everyone can participate and prosper. There's a common thread throughout each sector putting up roadblocks to successful business operations: access to capital, regulations, certifications, and infrastructure. Urban farming has its own obstacles, including land access, soil contaminants, water availability, and climate change. Land use regulations and ordinance needs to be updated. Access to capital, insurance, and risk mitigation are virtually non-existent. Unlike commodity crops, there are no federal subsidies for specialty crop producers, which are fruit and vegetable producers. Plugging into a consistent buyer's market can be challenging. Agriculture certifications required by retailers and institutions can be hard to get. Getting a fair price to cover inputs and labor requires consumer education to understand the true value of producing food, and nutrient-dense food is more valuable. To maintain nutritional value and extend shelf life, infrastructure costs for transportation, cold storage, pack stations, and traceability can be challenging for beginning farmers. Understanding these barriers help identify levers to pull to create system change. Black neighborhoods remain underdeveloped and under-resourced. There is $268 million gap between the food demand and food supply north of I-244. Rebuilding a local food system provides entrepreneurial opportunities for economic development. Financial resources should be targeted towards such development. As supermarkets mega-sized and distributors gobbled up all the small players, small neighborhood markets couldn't compete. The biggest barrier to operating a locally owned retail market is a minimum purchasing requirements of $25,000 a week by wholesalers. Banks won't fund them either, as they are considered high risk due to small margins needed to be competitive. Waste can ruin profitability. Perishables are hard to manage. Commercial kitchens can divert nutritional viable food of ugly or bruised produce to value-added product or meals. Sending true waste back to the farms for composting keeps soil healthy and keeps it out of the landfill. Building a regional food hub can solve many challenges we have identified for both farmer and retailer. It can provide transportation, cold storage, and access to a consistent buyer's market. It can provide wholesale products without minimum requirements, kitchen access, and distribution for the retailers. A local smart network is key for collaboration to build a successful local system. Training, combining knowledge, costs of inputs, and meeting capacity needs of the buyers can be coordinated. It can also attract outside funding from governments, foundations, and venture capitalists. A local food system can improve health outcomes. It can be positioned as an opportunity to repair and build locally owned businesses, generate jobs, help the environment, and enliven neighborhoods in North Tulsa. RG Foods has worked for 10 years as a nonprofit testing solutions to overcoming barriers to food access. People of color are most impacted by poor food access, diet-related disease, and other historical injustices. Food justice is a holistic view that sees healthy food as a right and to address structural barriers. Building a local community food system can be an empowering solution. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, Dr. Courtney Skipper has been an educator for over 20 years. She currently teaches high school here in Tulsa. An advocate for art inclusion in all schools, Dr. Skipper founded the Tulsa Children's Art Museum to increase student access to art. The museum will open June 1st at the OSU Tulsa campus at 700 North Greenwood.
Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what other people are thinking or experiencing from their frame of reference. There are many skills strengthened by empathy: creativity, feeling safe, and emotional connection. However, there is no reconciliation without empathy. How could one reconcile without it? It is the humanizing factor. Empathy is the secret that makes cooperation and civilization possible. The capacity, the strength to place oneself in another's position, to wear their shoes as they are standing in the midst of the fire. But why use art to increase empathy, to build bridges that connect us, to reconnect us? Because art is safe, it is reflective, it is truth, it speaks, it is research-based, it is personal, yet collective. Art heals emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually, encapsulates the moods, our ancestors' dreams, fire that burns over and over in us, never drenched, quiet, simmering, hot like it started today. It humanizes. It reveals the world around us, its beauty, its flaws, but most of all, it reveals us. Art says, look at me. I will not be invisible. Look at me and tell me who you are. Your response, whether cries, laughs, shrugs to my pain, reveals who you are. Art develops 3 types of empathy. Cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy. All 3 are needed to connect with others, to reconcile our truth with theirs. Cognitive empathy is connecting to what someone is thinking, reconciling someone else's thoughts to yours. It says, I understand you. I see you. Emotional empathy is connection to what someone else is experiencing, reconciling experiences to another's reality. It says, I feel you. Yet compassionate empathy leads us to action, connection through movement, listening, going, doing. It says, I will help you. Empathy is not common sense. It is an action, a responsibility. As with art, it must be taught, it must be developed, it must be experienced if we are to be reconciled. All barriers to empathy must be removed. Intentionally, timely, strategically, cautiously, but hastily. Blinders taken off, ears on, bodies moving toward, forward to reconciliation. Barriers like cognitive bias, thinking that your life or freedoms are more important than another's. Barriers such as dehumanization, failing to see others how you see yourselves. Barriers that speak of victims as if they set fires that have led to a century of post-traumatic stress, inequitable living conditions and access, and lack of opportunity have to be torn down, eradicated from the mind and the heart where they live. Research proves that, like smiles, empathy is contagious. As we continue to increase art access to all of Oklahoma's children, the Tulsa Children's Museum of Art will include art therapy classes for children. For more information, please contact Dr. Courtney Skipper, me, or visit our website at tulsachildrensmuseumofart.org.
Thank you, Dr. Skipper. Now we have Alicia Latimer. She has served as the African American Resource Center Coordinator for the Tulsa Library System for the past 15 years. She is active in the community where she serves on the 1921 Race Massacre Centennial Commission, the board of the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation, and is an inaugural member of the Greater Tulsa African American Affairs Commission. She's married to retired Tulsa Assistant Fire Marshal Millard Latimer Sr., a mother of 3 adults and 4 grandboys.
Hello. The boy is small, 7 or 8 or so. He wears a brown cap when I see him, always alone, always watching, longing to go home. He has a name, but I don't know it, and neither does he. We call him Unknown. He lived and died in Tulsa in 1921. This small, quiet child wears his innocence like a shroud about himself. Confusion hovers in a silver halo round his head. How did he die? Why is he dead? He doesn't understand, and neither do I. After the terrible thing happened in Tulsa, the horrific thing consuming the dreamland, the roar of gunfire from above, flashing jolts of hot, breathtaking air, cries of fear and despair, all the life-taking names too long spoken in whispers. You know, but you won't say so. The little Ruth saw and told of the little boy lying face up in a truckload, a pile, a heap, a collection of dead Black corpses. The boy's face frozen in a cold, unmoving mess of horror, dread, terror, unbelief, so much pain, such a shame for someone's little boy, someone's daughter, someone's love and joy. And there he is, unknown, staring at the placard on Standpipe Hill. Even the hill has a name, a memorial, a piece of land dedicated to those who fought, who took a stand for freedom and bled and died for what? The boy looks for his family there, a neighbor, a friend. Are they mixed in with the sand and silt where the tall monument stands? Do memories linger there of the ones who fought for what? Does anyone search for the child, or is he alone, the seeker? The unknown boy marches in the line of captives with both hands held high in the air, moans a solitary tune full of meaning and longing and loneliness. Go here, go there, march, march, march. The boy says, no one knows my name. Does anyone know your name, sir? I've seen you so many times. Does anyone know your name? We spin and run and die as bullets graze our feet and men drag a body behind a car. The dead man, who is he? Unknown sits outside Mount Zion Baptist Church, past no shadow, confused because the turret is missing. The turret where bullets flew and fire changed brick into char. The boy cries for his mother, for each mother with a still broken heart. For unknown, each day is the time on Greenwood Street when people walk through, look back, confused, blink their eyes, quick, shrug and shudder and shake just a bit like it's cold or something. Where are all the shops, unknown wonders? Talk, God, the boy says, find me. Say my name, my real name. Say what my name is. Ahmaud, Brianna, George, Floyd. Where were my last words? They're killing me. I can't breathe. Mama. Thrown like trash on a train headed north, floating in the Arkansas River, buried with the dead and still living and crying and moaning at Dawson Road, under the huge arena, beneath the ballpark, amid the roaring crowd. Strike one, so loud, strike two, run, run for home. You run for the safety of home. But where is my home? How will I know if I see where home used to be? How will I know if I still can't see, only stare in disbelief? Say my name, my unknown name, our unknown names, so we can go ahead and be at peace. Is my mother's name there on the roster? Because I want to go home where our family is, where my memory is, where I am known and welcomed. In Greenwood District, he waits and seeks, hoping to be remembered, to simply hear his own name spoken clearly without hesitation. Say my name, he begs. What is my name? When will we speak it? When will we see it? When will we seek it to know all of the names? Search for them, show care for him, for them, for those unknown, for those so long gone, for all of the unknown. Bruce Ziegler Avery's testimony. I saw cattle trucks heavily laden with bloody dead Black bodies. Some were naked, some dressed only in pants. They looked like they had been thrown upon the truck beds haphazardly, for arms and legs were sticking out through the slats. On the second truck, lying spread eagled atop a high pile of corpses, I saw the body of a little Black boy, barefooted, just about my age. Suddenly the truck hit a manhole in the street. His head rolled over facing me, staring as though he had been frightened to death. This is dedicated in loving memory to Tulsa's unknown victims. May 31st to June 1st, 1921.
Wow. Thank you, Alicia. So we're going to move to the Q&A portion of the event. Our first question is for Greg Taylor. Mr. Taylor, what are your thoughts on the Greenwood Unity Heritage Sector Plan released by Tulsa Development Authority?
It's a big project. I mean, I think that's something that if you don't know, if you're listening and don't know what that is, it's an area between where Greenwood starts downtown and goes up to the Gilcrease Expressway. That's the neighborhoods they're calling the Unity Heritage. And I'm doing working on building new homes and doing rehabs in those neighborhoods. And so it's a lot. I mean, if you go read I'm impressed with the engagement with the public about what to do in those neighborhoods to revitalize. I'm always impressed with that kind of engagement at that level. The report you can see online, it's public. What I really think is lacking often is at the level where they do something called a call for proposal. It often isn't as public as I think it should be. And often people who are in the neighborhoods, like in North Tulsa, they miss out on getting bids. And so that's a big problem. And I could say a lot more, but I want to give time for other questions and answers. But thank you for your question.
So one more question for you, Greg, is what volunteer opportunities exist with 1256 movement if you are not a builder? And do you have to be an existing homeowner in order to qualify for reparations?
Yeah, one of the distinguishing things a lot of people know about Habitat, so you can show up and your company can volunteer. This is a little bit different. What we're doing with 1256 is saying that for every new home that a Black family builds in Tulsa, 1256 will pay a $10,000 reparation payment specifically for the sins of the race massacre. And if you want to rehab your home, we'll also give $10,000. So there's a little bit of a process to go through to apply for that. We welcome you to do that. And for example, if it's a rehab home, one of the big gaps that exists is when you see a home that has those numbers on the boarded up windows, those are vacant homes that have been established with the city. They're vacant, but they often have a story and sometimes even an owner, and often flippers come and buy those homes and then they now own them for a few $1,000s to a distressed person. We're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to go and find those owners, help them get back into their homes. But it takes money to do that. So volunteers would come at times when we rehab a home and you can help us to do the demo work. We'd love for you to do that. You can go to our website, 1256movement.org. The other part of the question is, do you have to be an existing homeowner? If you'd like to own a home, then we're a big thing we're all about is home ownership. We want to increase home ownership among Black families, not just in North Tulsa, but anywhere you want to build in Tulsa.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions here for Katie Dilks. One says your description of the eviction crisis and the need for legal representation for tenants was clear and compelling. What is being done to ensure Tulsans who are evicted can access legal counsel?
Thank you. That's a great question. So like I said, several partners are working together on this to make sure that we can sort of serve as many people who are facing potential eviction as possible. So through some federal funds and also some really generous local philanthropy support, there are legal aid lawyers and other volunteer lawyers who are at the eviction docket every single day. So if people have been served with a summons for their court date, they can connect with lawyers there at the docket if they haven't had a chance to connect before. I think the most important part, though, is trying to figure out how we can connect with other community partners to do outreach to tenants who may be facing this before that court date, because that's where it gets to be almost too late. So thinking about what community partners we can connect with to make sure tenants know about what their rights are, know how to connect with legal aid ahead of time, know about the available rental assistance right now. There's $260 million available in rental assistance in the state of Oklahoma this year for people who have been impacted by COVID. So there are many things that are sort of working together to make sure that people can access counsel right now, but a lot of that also is due to the additional federal funds from COVID relief. So one of the things about the right to counsel efforts as we move forward with those is to make sure that there's sustainable funding for these efforts when that federal stream dries up. So that is going to take some really, I think, good, hardworking partnership between the city, the county, philanthropy, legal aid, and all of these partners who are sort of in this service space to make sure we build a solution that can work for everybody and that can have long-term legs. And I think it's going to take a lot of creative problem solving. So if people want to get involved with it, our website for the Access to Justice Foundation is okaccesstojustice.org. And if you email us there just at info@okaccesstojustice.org, I can put that in the chat because I know it's really long. That's a really good way to get involved, and we can sort of figure out where your skill set or organization might be a best fit.
Thank you. The other question for you is, with the lasting harm that eviction causes for tenants that you described, are there alternatives that landlords can use other than eviction to resolve issues with tenants?
I love this question. Yes, there is. So Oklahoma is actually home to a model program called the Early Settlement Mediation Program. This is literally one that other states come here to study and copy. It is a high quality, free, volunteer staffed mediation program that's available all across the state for anybody who is facing a conflict and wants to potentially avoid going through the court system. So if either tenants or landlords are facing challenges, including, struggling to pay rent, if there are issues with housing conditions, if repairs need to be made, any of these things that could potentially be figured out if you could just sit down with somebody to sort of guide that conversation for you. That's exactly what the Early Settlement Mediation Program does. It's totally free. Either side can apply. If you just Google Tulsa Early Settlement Mediation Program, you could find it, but also I'll find the link and put it in the chat there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all of our questions. I think you guys can see in the chat, someone asked a question about genealogy. I think that's out of the purview of this event. There is, of course, the library has a genealogy center at Hardesty Library. Let's see, Rebecca's telling us recording of this event will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/Tulsa Library. Any final words?
Yeah, we do have the tulsalibrary.org/AARC. You can go to that page if you're thinking about African American related genealogy. And also we do have a research department. So if you'll go to our website, you'll see our research wizard. And also you're welcome to go into the library at Rudisill if you're wanting to look up the Dawes rolls, or also online, we have Afrogenius, African American genealogy online. So there are outlets for that.
Thank you, Alicia. Of course, the African American Resource Center is the best place to start for any of these questions. And Greg mentioned the Mary Parrish's books, Events of the Tulsa Disaster, written in 1922-23. I believe that's available for checkout in our catalog for the library. And please do join us for more events commemorating the Tulsa Race Massacre. Next week, we're having Robin DeAngelo, and our own Tracy Scott will be interviewing her. So you can see the programming at tulsalibrary.org/TRMC. Katie posted about the Early Settlement Mediation Program, so there's that link. And Robin DeAngelo is April 22nd. She's the author of White Fragilities. Should be a really interesting discussion. And thank you all for joining us this evening. It's been a really enlightening. I've learned a lot this evening. There's a lot going on in our town for sure.
I want to say April the 18th as well, that there will be a African American entrepreneurship program through the library. So be sure to check our website for information about the other programs that are available through the Tulsa City County Library System.
Thank you, Alicia, and thanks to our panelists. You guys are awesome. That was all really wonderful information. And have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.